While the world watches Donald Trump's warnings to Iran, his personal investment account is doing something far more interesting. In just 3 months, that account made over 3,000 trades, worth up to $750 million. But here's the kicker. Some of the biggest bets in the oil market were placed just 15 minutes before the president even opened his mouth. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. I'm not claiming that these trades were made by Trump, his family, or anyone connected to his administration. There's no proof of that. This is simply a striking coincidence, and a question worth asking. Is this just a series of lucky guesses, or something more? For months, Trump has promised to solve the Iran problem. He talks about deals. Then he demands surrender. Then he threatens new strikes. Then he announces that negotiations are going well. And then the negotiations collapse again. The result? The Iran crisis remains suspended somewhere between war and peace. The Strait of Hormuz remains a major problem. Oil prices swing violently with every major development, and global markets react to almost every important statement Trump makes about Iran. In other words, Trump's Iran policy is not just foreign policy. It is a market-moving machine. And this is where his personal finances become very interesting. American journalists have discovered that an investment account in Trump's name made more than 3,000 trades during the first quarter of 2026. That is an extraordinary number. We're talking about roughly 60 transactions every trading day. Now, the number of trades itself does not prove anything. Financial experts say such activity can be consistent with automated investment strategies, including direct indexing and tax loss harvesting. So let's look at something much more important: the timing. On March 2nd, as the war was beginning and fears of a wider conflict were rising, Trump's account bought shares of Newmont, one of the world's largest gold mining companies. On March 4th, it bought U.S. Treasury securities. On March 5th, it bought a large position in a gold fund. Again, these are perfectly legitimate investments, but they were being made at exactly the moment when the Iran conflict was creating the kind of uncertainty that normally drives investors toward gold and U.S. government bonds. And then came March 23rd. This is where the story gets much more interesting. Trump announced that the United States would postpone planned strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure. He said that Washington and Tehran were having very good and productive conversations. The market immediately interpreted this as a possible de-escalation. Oil prices plunged. Brent fell by roughly 11%. And on that very same day, the investment account in Trump's name bought shares of ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Phillips 66. It also bought shares of major defense companies, including Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics. Think about that for a moment. The President of the United States says that the possibility of war with Iran is decreasing. Oil prices collapse. And on the same day, an investment account in his name buys major American energy companies and defense contractors. Now again, I am not saying that Trump personally ordered these purchases. His representatives say that independent financial institutions manage his investments and have authority over the trades. That may be completely true, but it still raises a very uncomfortable question. Why is the personal wealth of the President of the United States invested in the exact sectors that his own foreign policy decisions can dramatically move? And then we come to those mysterious oil trades. On March 23rd, roughly 15 minutes before Trump announced that he was postponing the planned strikes, traders placed approximately $500 million in bets that oil prices would fall. After Trump spoke, oil prices did exactly that. They collapsed. Now, who were those traders? We don't know. Were they connected to Trump? There is no evidence proving that. Were they connected to his administration? Again, there is no evidence of that. So I'm not presenting this as a fact. I'm presenting it as a question, because the timing is extraordinary. And it happened again. On April 7th, nearly $950 million in bets on falling oil prices were placed just hours before Trump announced a ceasefire with Iran. After the announcement, oil prices plunged. Reuters reported that the unusual timing of these trades raised questions and attracted scrutiny from U.S. authorities. But once again, there is no evidence linking these trades to Trump. That distinction is extremely important, because this is not a story about proving a conspiracy. It is a story about incentives. Think about what uncertainty does to financial markets. Oil goes up when war looks imminent. Oil falls when a deal suddenly looks possible. Gold rises when investors become afraid. Defense stocks react to escalation. Energy companies respond to changes in oil prices. Every major Trump statement can move billions of dollars. A few sentences on Truth Social can change the outlook for entire industries. The President of the United States is therefore not simply making foreign policy decisions. He is constantly creating market events. And now, add another fact. The Trump family has become deeply involved in finance and cryptocurrency. According to Reuters, several major crypto ventures connected to the Trump family have generated billions of dollars in value and income for the family. Trump's business empire is no longer just hotels, golf courses, and real estate. It increasingly intersects with financial markets. So we have to ask a very uncomfortable question. Who benefits from the uncertainty? Because uncertainty can be extremely profitable. If peace suddenly looks likely, oil prices can collapse. If war looks imminent, oil can surge. If the Strait of Hormuz looks threatened, energy markets react. If Trump threatens another strike, defense stocks can move. If he announces negotiations, the entire market can turn in the opposite direction. And every time, investors are trying to anticipate what the president will say next. Now imagine having billions of dollars invested in that system. And imagine being the person whose words can move the system. This is where the question of conflict of interest becomes impossible to ignore. Again, I am not saying Trump is deliberately prolonging the Iran crisis to make money. We do not have evidence of that. Maybe his investment managers are simply doing their jobs. Maybe every trade is perfectly legal. Maybe every strange coincidence is exactly that, a coincidence. But there is another possibility. What if Trump really cannot solve the Iran crisis? Maybe Iran is simply too difficult. Maybe Tehran refuses to surrender. Maybe the military pressure is not enough to force a political settlement. Maybe there is no agreement that both sides are willing to accept. But what if there's another reason the crisis remains unresolved? What if Trump simply does not want to solve it too quickly? Because as long as the crisis continues, uncertainty continues. And as long as uncertainty continues, markets continue to move. Oil, gold, defense stocks, energy companies, cryptocurrency, and the president remains one of the few people on earth who can influence all of these markets with a single statement. This does not mean that Trump wants America to lose. It does not mean that he wants Iran to win. And it certainly does not prove that he is deliberately keeping the conflict alive for personal financial gain. But it does create a question that Americans have every right to ask. Does the President of the United States have the same financial incentives as the country he is governing? Because this is where the story gets bigger than Iran. If Trump ends the crisis tomorrow, the uncertainty disappears. The market adjusts. Oil may fall. Gold may fall. Defense stocks may fall. The extraordinary market volatility surrounding every presidential statement may begin to disappear. But if the crisis remains unresolved, every threat creates another market move. Every negotiation creates another market move. Every rumor about a ceasefire creates another market move. Every statement about the Strait of Hormuz creates another market move. And the man at the center of all of it is Donald Trump. So maybe the question is not simply whether Trump can solve the Iran problem. Maybe the more important question is whether he has enough incentive to solve it quickly. And that is a very different question. Because in a democracy, the issue is not only whether a president has broken the law. It is whether the public can trust that the person making decisions for the country is making those decisions for the country, and not for his own financial interests. We don't know the answer, and perhaps we never will. But while the answer remains unclear, one thing is certain. The Iran crisis continues. The markets continue to move. Trump continues to make market-moving statements. And his personal investment portfolio continues to exist inside the very financial system those statements can move. So perhaps Iran is not the real problem. Perhaps the real problem is much closer to home. Where does President Trump end and the businessman begin?